Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Supervisors meeting on August 20th, 2013. And before we rise for the pledge led by Supervisor Munzer, I want to recognize Supervisor De La Cruz.
Yes, I was wondering, when we rise, can we hold a couple of moments in behalf of Charlie Scott, who passed away?
Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor De La Cruz. Mr. Scott was a very important member of our community in Hollister, not only for his city, but for our nation, serving our country. Can I have a motion for a certificate of posting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. We'll move on to public comment. Do we have any speakers?
Yes, we do. First speaker is Marvin Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was a couple of months back you had made some comment, Mr. Chairman, about how these consultants come up with their plans. They must have a template. I may have found it. The Local Agenda 21 Planning Guide talks a lot about metrics. Got to have numbers to measure. It's very important. On health and safety element in our general plan, section 5.8 is the one that comes up with numbers. That's the one that says we need to reduce our greenhouse gas to 80% of what it was in 1990. Gave you information last meeting about greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been increasing 1 to 2% a year for the last 50 years. Real constant, very reproducible. So if we got 2% a year, say, Supervisor De La Cruz, you can correct me on this, but if you got, say, a $20 bill and you earn 2% interest on it, in 81 years you'll get to 100. So if 1990 is 100, we're speaking of 1908 as our target in the general plan for the greenhouse gas emissions from the county of San Benito. 1908. Maybe off a year, but not much. So we ought to all drive Volts or Priuses or one of these Tesla cars that gets 40, 50 miles to the gallon. I figured up that if I had one of those when I was commuting to Morgan Hill every day, I'd probably save 600 gallons of gas a year. $4 a gallon, that's $2,400. That's $200 a month. That's okay. But then again, 600 gallons of gas, take this on faith, 1 gallon of gas will produce about 23.5, 24 pounds of carbon dioxide. I use 25 pounds because it made math easier. So my 600 gallons is going to save 15,000 pounds of carbon dioxide a year. That's not insignificant. A Prius or a Volt, one of the Tesla cars, does have a little carbon footprint. So in any case, I'd still be saving 6, 7 tons of carbon dioxide a year. I'd be doing my part. Then I figured out how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere of the Earth. Buckle up, brace yourself. 900 million tons of carbon dioxide are floating around the Earth. That's not counting what's dissolved in the ocean. That's not counting what's in the rocks and all. If we go back to before we started burning all the fossil fuels, before the greenhouse gas carbon dioxide started going up, we may have had 600 million tons of carbon dioxide. So we probably added 200-300 million tons of carbon dioxide. Wrapping up, that would be equivalent to about 50 million Volt automobiles we need to be driving. And in conclusion, this particular section on the carbon dioxide greenhouse gases in our general plan is not listed in the required sections of that matrix Early in your general plan, it says what's required and what's optional. So this is an optional entity that you have in your general plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Felicia Corona.
How long do I have? A minute? Or 3? Oh. Thank you. My name is Felicitas Corona. Sorry to say good morning. I'm a member of the SEIU Long-Term Care. I'm here to tell you to continue to fund our in-home support services at the same level as previous years in order to provide a more living wage of $11.50. This is an increase of $1 that will match our surrounding counties, Monterey, Santa Cruz. We hope that San Benito, pardon me? Thank you. Maybe not. No.
Not the right size.
Counties. We hope that San Benito County can also be a county where our work is acknowledged and compensated equally. When home care workers went to Sacramento in 2012, we fought for the correlated care initiative that will be integrating, oh my goodness, community managed care model to long-term support services. Coordinated care reduces the use of emergency and hospital services. Coordinated medical health care system with long-term support, nursing facilities, and other communities options. With this expansion, our county received a reimbursement of $70,000+ because coordinated care initiative living brings more federal funds. The community first choice option to cover care support services. Our county MOE for IHSS is now lower because of the work of ULC. Oh, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Nesta Rivera.
Good morning, supervisors and chair. My name is Nestor. I am an organizer for the SEIU United Long-Term Care Workers here in San Benito. I received a letter from one of our members regarding the recent pay cut that they have received for the in-home support services hours. It's a total reduction of 8%, and I wanted to share what she wrote to us. And I'm going to go skipping straight ahead into the middle of the letter, but I would like to give this letter to her supervisor, which would be Anthony Patello. I cannot go out and find a part-time job because of the person I care for, Ray Masquez, is a very sick man and needs 24-hour care. Ray has cataract glaucoma on both of his eyes and cannot see very well, and is also on the liver kidney transplant list. So he's very weak and unbalanced. Once a week, he gets an injection for anemia because his blood count is so low. We live in San Juan Bautista and have to travel to either Hollister, Gilroy, Salinas, depending on where the doctor is available to get his shot. Every 2 weeks, he has to take blood tests at Stanford Hospital in the beginning of each month, and he has to get blood drawn at Stanford Lab, which we have to send via FedEx. All of Ray's tests consist of CT scans, X-rays, ultrasounds, cataract echograms, blood labs and blood transfusions, and random drug and alcohol tests. Ray is in very poor health and needs help walking and making sure he doesn't trip and fall. I will take him with me to buy groceries, pay bills, pick up his medication because he needs exercise, plus he cannot be left alone. The pay cut affects us a lot because of the gas to travel to and from doctor's appointments and copay on all of his medications. Some of his vitamins are also very expensive and over the counter. T-gel for his psoriasis, diapers he wears at night in case of an accident, alcohol pads and pads he needs for checking his diabetes, razors and shaving cream. Some of Barbara's daily tasks consist of 6:30. She wakes up every day at 6:30 a.m. to 7 to check on his patient's blood glucose level, gives him an injection, and then helps him wash into the shower. Makes him breakfast, gives him lactose medication every 30 minutes. While he's having breakfast, I clean the bathroom and bedroom. After breakfast, clean kitchen, wash dishes, put them away, sweep and mop and vacuum, clean and dust the living room. From 11:30 to 12, check on his blood glucose, give sliding scale injection, make him lunch. Between 1 to 1:30, give him his lactose. At 3 p.m., check his blood glucose. At 5:30 to 6, give lactose, check blood glucose, give him insulin before dinner, check his blood pressure. The recent cut to IHSS providers has created a huge discrepancy, and with the coordinated care initiative that our members fought in Sacramento that brings in more federal funds, that gave this county a $70,000 reimbursement for a lower maintenance of effort in its future. We hope that we can utilize and continue to fund IHSS.
If we could wrap up your comments.
So our members fought for this initiative so that we can lower the maintenance of efforts for our counties. We can only hope that we can utilize that money to increase the wage of our workers. We fought for a better program, not to fix this county's deficit.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Marty Richmond.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Marty Richmond from Hollister. Last night at the City Council, I spoke about the lack of enforcement of the sign regulations in the city. I'm sure that we're having the same problem in some little pieces of the county that are stuck right next to the city. I'm not talking about the broad part of the county that's more rural. I'm talking about those parts because you can't. There's no dividing line. You can't tell. You just go from one to the other. There's just been a lack of enforcement. There are adequate ordinances in the city. I assume there's so in the county. I'm not as familiar with the county ordinances, but in the city there are lots of ordinances. First of all, because they're not enforcing the law, they're not getting the sign fees they're supposed to get. Therefore, they can't afford to enforce it anymore. So we have a case where there's banner signs all over the place, and there are many of them in disrepair. Many of them are illegal. The people who are paying the fees are getting cheated because they're paying the fees and other people are doing it for nothing. The last part is the risk that you run because we're allowing people without any recourse to paste stuff all over the stop signs, traffic control signs critical for public safety. And sooner or later, somebody will run one of those signs and have a really bad accident, and their defense, be it truthful or not, is going to be, I was distracted because there were 20 or 30 garage sale signs and either posted on it or the leftover tape that's fluttering all over the place in front of the signs. And I have no idea where the court would go on that or a jury would go on that. And I don't think this Board of Supervisors knows either how they would go. And so you're risking both their lives and their financial stability because you could wind up as the deep pocket on a very big lawsuit. I hope you could find the time, and this would be self-funding if you would do it, to just enforce the ordinances. There is no excuse for allowing the valuable properties here to go into the trash mode so that everything looks like a piece of junk. after all the people, I see people all the time here on 4th Street busy raking leaves, cleaning their front yard, doing all kinds of things to keep their property in good shape. And many of these folks don't have a lot of money. They're out there working to do it. They're working on their front yards, and they're cleaning the sidewalks and doing all this stuff just to have somebody who is in business put out an illegal sign on the ground, and I hope you do something about it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Mary Schneider.
I read in the newspaper, Mary Schneider, Friends of the Library, live on Monterey Street. The thing I had come to mention was that I noticed in the newspaper that the courthouse creation is freeing some space and people are moving around looking for space. I noticed that there was option 1 and option 2 that you were discussing. And one of the options involved the County Board of Education moving to new space and the library being allowed to assume the space for which it was originally built. When I came here in the 70s, I found the library was, it was okay for the size of the county population at the time, which was 1/3 of what it is now. The county has grown, the library shrunk because the Board of Supervisors had partitioned off the original space to form an office for the Board of Education. Now that you have the opportunity to change something that was done for probably good reasons back in the day, I hope you'll take it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to address the board at this time on items not on the agenda?
Mr. Chair, we have somebody in the audience that I'm sure would like to address the board, but may not know the protocol about getting a form. So
Okay.
if you could come up and during this time, and maybe they will fill out a card in a little while. I invited them, I attended along with some other supervisors, the San Benito Health Foundation open house, their annual open house, and I was informed about the success of this young lady, and I said that this would be important for the community to know her next steps in her career.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Barrios.
Hello, my name is Angelica Rojas, and I'm a nutrition and health educator at the San Benito Health Foundation. And I'm happy to be here today. And like Margie said, I want to talk a little bit about my successes and my future goals. Just to start off, I was born and raised here. And to tell you about an award that I received. Each year, the Guyber-Gibson Program in Community Health Policy of the George Washington University School of Public Health and Health Services honors young, emerging leaders in community health. Emerging leaders are nominated by community health centers and primary care associations nationwide and are selected by a committee from the Senior Health Center's leadership. Emerging leaders reflect an enormous range of talented young people who have made a career in the health center's family and personify the enduring strength of health centers. In March of 2013, I traveled to Washington, D.C. to be recognized as an emerging leader for underserved populations. Also, by decision of the Washington University and the National Association of Community Health Centers, I received an award for an emerging leader in migrant health. And in May of 2013, I graduated from San Jose State with a bachelor's of health science and nutrition and food science. And my future goals are to go on and pursue a master's in public health policy. And I have been invited by the Washington University to attend there. And with that, before I graduated in my convocation at San Jose State, I also received 2 other awards. One was for outstanding community engagement, and the other one was the Allison Council Award on behalf of a woman that advocated for her community that passed away of breast cancer.
Thank you.
Thank you so
I just think it's so important to recognize young community leaders that will, I'm sure, shape the future of the health in San Benito County. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing that time. So.
Supervisor Barrios for bringing the young lady in, and it's very important that we encourage our young folks to become leaders in this community and develop skill sets that we all need. And thank you very much for your participation, and we wish you best of luck. And keep us informed what you're doing. Please do come back. With that, we'll move on to department head announcements. CAO Espinoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do have a few announcements today. One announcement from the administrative office is the announcement of our interim chief probation officer. His name is Don Blevins. He has an impressive record. He has over 35 years of service in the public probation field. And I wanted to do is introduce you to the board and to the public right now. So we'd like to put a face to the name, Don Blevins. Feel free to go to the podium if you want to say a few words.
Welcome to San Benito County.
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. I was honored to be selected to be the person to fill in and run your probation department. I do bring almost 36 years of probation experience, including chief in 2 slightly larger counties than San Benito. I've been on the job for a week now, and my initial assessment is your past chief left this department in pretty good shape. So I'd like to bring my expertise to see if we can make any enhancements or improve the operation of the department in the time that I'll be here. I'll assist you in finding a good candidate to take the job permanently, and I look forward to meeting each one of you individually. So thanks for the warm welcome. I'm adjusting well. I've actually found a place to live, so I'm now a local resident, so I look forward to the challenge.
Great, thank you. Is there any questions or comments from the Board of Supervisors? I just want to say that we certainly are relieved to have your expertise here. I know that's weighed heavily on our minds to be able to get somebody to run our probation department, and we have a good probation department. We lost a chief that did an absolute turnaround, and so you're not stepping in too much of a mess. And if there's anything that this board can do, please let us know, and we look forward working with you.
Thank you. I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you.
We have another announcement as well. At our last board meeting, we were discussing the general plan and the options of a special board meeting, what day, what time. So the consensus is August the 27th at 9 a.m. Would be our special board meeting that is available or a good time for your board. We wanted to make sure that the public was aware of that time. The third item is I just wanted to kind of give you a quick preview of the next month's board agendas. We are going to be discussing the airline highway renaming, quarterly fire report. We're going to be bringing back to your board the animal ordinance, in particular the vicious dogs discussion that was requested by your board. We're also going to be discussing the San Justo Reservoir. We're going to be receiving an update from the Water District with regards to that. Also bringing back to your board the tax sharing agreement with San Juan Bautista and the adoption of the budget as well in September. So those are some highlights for next month. I just want to make sure the board and the public are aware of that. We also have another announcement from Steve Wittry, our Public Works Director.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. I actually have 3 announcements for you this morning. The first one is the Coalinga Road bridge crossing, known as Miller's Crossing. As you may be aware, about 18 months ago or so, we began the process for permitting cleanup on 5 different low water crossings and repair of Old Hernandez Road with Department of Fish and Game, Bureau of Dams, and so forth. The permits have come through finally, and actually this week we will begin the work at Miller's Crossing. It should last about a week down there and take care of some of that standing water that's been down there for quite some time. So any travelers that we have down through there, I know that a lot of motorcycle traffic goes through that area. In terms of tourism, we'll be able to pass that without going through water. So that'll be happening actually starting today, right now, and it should be done by next week. Also wanted to report to you, the board, that the work that we've done on New Idria Road for our demo of our machine is essentially complete. That was finished up last week. There's a little bit of cleanup left to do, some sweeping and whatnot. I'll be bringing a full report, pictures, and costs to the board in September as well, so you'll know the success, the apparent success that we've had down there. We're going to monitor that road for about 6 or 8 months over the winter to see how it wears, and then we'll begin using that process elsewhere within the county. The third thing I wanted to talk about just real briefly was there's been some discussion regarding some of the rock that's been placed on 4th Street bridge approach over the last few days. As the board remember, we have that rock from the landfill that was in excess that's generated by the digging of new areas for disposal of trash. What we did was we moved several tons of rock to that area as a way to have it available should something happen to the bridge. As you're aware, and the community is aware, that bridge is jointly owned, city and county, actually split right down the middle. The county is on the west, the city is on the east. So what we did is we coordinated with city officials, being the city manager, being the community services director, being code enforcement, and the development services director as to locations of where that rock can go. And the area that was placed was along the 4th Street area on the old right-of-way, as well as down below the bridge, trying to solve multiple problems with that asset being placed there. The rock would be there in case there were flooding. It would stop the difficulty that the city had in terms of parking large vehicles out there, and it also deter the homeless, which have set up encampments underneath that river there, would deter that operation down there. So that's the reason why the rock is there. All the rock that is planned to be moved has been moved, and what we will do now is we came to the board about a month ago. We'll make an assessment of the rock that's still up there and make for a disposal process to try to earn some money from the remaining rock that's up at the John Smith landfill. So.
Any questions from the board? I know I have one. Supervisor Farrell Cruz.
Thank you. Steve, thank you for that information. And you mentioned that the rocks are in the process of being transferred or being removed from that location?
From the origination location, so
Okay.
basically up at the landfill itself.
They're still over here.
Those are planned to stay there. We still have a very large pile up at John Smith landfill that we will be disposing of.
I just wondered because when excuse me, when members of the community come into Hollister, specifically on the west side, and I know that the city of Hollister is trying to make a west side beautification program, first thing you see are rocks. And I just wonder if that's counterproductive to have those rocks out there instead of maybe spreading them out where you can't really see the rocks. They become part of the community. I just wondering, did we take some kind of other thought into that it might actually look ugly out there instead of placing those rocks out there?
Well, I think that there was some thought in that process as well. It wasn't just dumped out there, because I think the real problem that the city had in terms of, this is talking to the city officials, the problem that the city had was dealing with the homeless and the trucks that park up there constantly, and then when the trucks are up there, generally they spend the night and they do things that they shouldn't be doing in the public in terms of relieving themselves and urges that have to happen, bodily functions and so forth that would happen in that area was not designed for that either. So the deterrent factor of getting those trucks off there was seen to be a much more benefit than the rocks. Now the rocks right now have been dumped just out of the back of an end up essentially. They could be placed a little bit nicer with some work out there that the city could do if they chose to do in terms of moving that rock to more of a linear fashion. Because right now, you're correct. It does look like they were just simply dumped out there but they could be placed a little bit nicer, so it did look a little bit more inviting, if you will.
I mean, why can't, sometimes thinking outside the box gets a lot of members of the community together instead of saying, well, the rule says this says this, that and that and that. And I think you're kind of hitting on it, and if the city or the county or both would have done a program in which we try to take them away from the public's view, we try to make it as okay as we can, and if the goal is for the 100-year flood zone, and so we expect one pretty soon within the next couple of years, is that what you're telling me?
No, basically it's not for a 100-year flood zone. What it is to create any kind of surges. As you recall, back in the late 90s, there was a surge that took out several bridges, and actually Caltrans before, because that formerly was a Caltrans bridge, as for the community, as you're well aware, that bridge is now the property of both the city and the county jointly, and it's up to us to maintain it and protect it.
I understand the goal. Let's try to address some of the community's concerns. It looks ugly. It looks like a bunch of rocks, and then we're trying to make, specifically on the west side of Hollister, more beautiful. Let's work. Come up with some ideas. That's all I'm asking. And operational, functional, you might be right. They have to be out there. However, let's, maybe, add some sugar to it, sugar coated, or let's paint something so it doesn't look as ugly as it does.
Right.
That's all I'm asking.
And that's a very good question, a very good thing to ask and push for. Our agreement, because we didn't charge the city for those rocks out there, was however they wanted to situate those rocks, they can do that. So in terms of spending that time and working with perhaps the group who's doing the West Side Gateway project to try to figure out how some of those can be, those ideas and the community can be addressed to form that in there, I fully agree with you. That'd be a way to go with that process and try to have it look,
Yeah, we probably could have put them at Bergantino Park around there, and it might have been maybe 10, 20 seconds differential, but they still would have been out
there. And not to get into the debate, but the reality is that there's a large right-of-way that's over there that's available where there's not at Brigantino Park, and if there is flooding, it's going to come at that abutment, and basically a bulldozer can just put that into the abutment, because I'm not really talking about the 100-year flood per se. I'm talking about a rush load, something that came down from suddenly, like we had before, where there was a dam that was formed from a landslide, and then a mass of water came down and attacked, essentially, the Hospital Road area and that bridge as well. And as you're well aware, Caltrans spent several $1 million retrofitting the 4th Street Bridge before they relinquished it to us.
I understand that, and I'm not trying to, look at the tree, and I'm trying to look at the forest. I totally understand that. But at the same time, we got technology, and we got super genius employees, both at the city and the county, that can help us dictate, early situations where the water's going to come down there. We know it. Come on, we know that. So I'm begging, let's look into it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor De La Cruz. Supervisor Barrios?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, I know that the rock is serving several purposes. I'd rather see the rock, actually, than the trucks that were parked there before. But I'd like to address this at the intergovernmental level, so I'll ask our CAO to put it on the agenda, because I think that would be a good place to discuss it and ask the city to help us with. Because I think that the rock, like I said, serves several purposes, but it can look nicer. So we'll ask them to help us, so.
Great,
Thank you, CAO.
And I know, my question was, before we have a flood, does it make sense to put the rock in the channel to protect the wastewater treatment line, which I think is or within that area through the channel? But I imagine that's next to impossible because the salmon run, we can't disrupt the salmon run.
Well, actually, you laugh, but it is designated as steelhead. And even though it's dry several months of the year, it is designated Fish and Game Steelhead Run, and we can't do a lot of stuff out there. As I mentioned with the earlier items I was talking about, it took us basically 18 months to get a permit for a simple concrete, pulling some gravel off of a concrete crossing from Fish and Game and other departments. So we could certainly look at that, but it's a long process to get the approval to actually put it in non-emergency times.
And so, just today I happen been coming in from San Juan on 4th Street. That's my route here. And, first thing I notice is the rock. But I understand what we're trying to accomplish, the city and the county, in protecting our infrastructure. But when it comes right down to it, if the city is interested in beautification, they ought to look at those lots, those vacant lots. It's worse than John Smith landfill. it's a garbage dump. And I would start there than worrying about the rocks. But that's just me. But that thought went through my mind as I drove into town today. Thank you.
We have another department head announcement. We have our auditor, recorder, elections, and everything else. Seems like Joe Paul Gonzalez to give a department head announcement.
Good morning, Chair, Board of Supervisors.
Morning.
Today, Angela Curl, Assistant Clerk Recorder, and myself are here to provide a notice to each of the board members and to the members of the public regarding a postcard that about 3,000 registered voters will be getting in the next 7 to 10 days. This postcard is called the Alternate Residency Confirmation Process postcard. It's sent to inactive voters who have been inactive for the last 4 years but are on the active registered voter roll. And as I said, about 3,000 voters. So you may be getting questions from the community as what those cards are about. So the card contains questions regarding their desire to stay on the active voter roll and if they have moved within the county or if they have moved out of county. The voter indicates if they have moved, the voter's address will be updated in our voter registration system. If the card is not returned, the voter will remain eligible to vote, but will be moved to the inactive voter roll. The voter will not be canceled or deleted unless they remain inactive for the next 4 years. Currently, there are about 6,200 inactive voters in our inactive voter roll. The information provided in the return postcards will enable the department to maintain a more accurate voter roll, active voter roll, and will bring election cost savings by not having to print and put postage on sample ballots, voter information pamphlets, or vote-by-mail ballots. Are there any questions from the board?
Any questions from the board? Okay, thank you, Joe Paul.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
No.
Okay.
That's it for department head announcements.
As we agendize that meeting for the 27th, if we could agendize it in a fashion that this board makes a solid, hard decision whether or not we will keep the specialist study areas or pull them out, that we have that flexibility at that time. I would appreciate that, and also any other changes that this board would have to direct planning and if we go in the direction of another consultant to give concise direction on how we are going to finish up and wrap up this general plan.
Yes, that's the plan, Mr. Chair, and that's what we'll bring to your board on the 27th.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the very aggressive schedule on a number of items that has been on our list to complete. So we'll move on to board announcements. Supervisor David Cruz?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Barrios and myself, and I'm not too sure if Supervisor Munzer attended the San Benito Health Foundation farm worker weekend last week, and it was pleasant. It was good educational, and I didn't know this. Is it your father or your grandfather?
My father.
Her father was actually one of the original signatures to the creation of the San Benito Health Foundation. Thank you, Margie.
You're very welcome.
I did not know that. Thank you very much. That's good. And then Supervisor Munzer and Barrios and myself attended the Hazel Hawkins study session, a gold objective meeting, and Ken Underwood and his staff provided some good information about the status of our health in San Benito County from a hospital perspective. That was, well, I think I learned a lot from that perspective, and I also learned a lot from the San Benito Health Foundation, too. We had COG also last week, and believe it or not, there was a presentation from AMBAG on the types of alternative planning or transportation planning that the community wants to go. And believe it or not, I actually supported a concept of no growth and keeping our current infrastructure in place or improving our current infrastructure. And I was just thinking about Supervisor Botello at that time. Because he's right. I mean, we have 5th Street, we have 6th Street, we have West Street, and all other streets in my district that need repair. Totally support that we need to address those issues. And also Supervisor Munzer and myself attended a couple of meetings in reference to the labor camp, and Ray, thank you for hosting those meetings. We had one meeting with the Farm Labor Association, and then another meeting with the Homeless Coalition, and tomorrow, Thursday, we're going to have a joint meeting with both the Homeless Coalition and the Farm Labor Association, and then that will be the meeting, unless Supervisor Munzer wishes to have more meetings with someone else. That will be the last meeting, and then we'll bring a recommendation to the board for full consideration, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Supervisor De La Cruz. Any others? Supervisor Munzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Supervisor De La Cruz mentioned, at the ANBAG, we also had a long discussion on the metropolitan plan. Let me bring this up. For the sustainable communities. And I know AMBAG was going out to other public agencies, discussing it with them, and at our next meeting in September, we'll come up with a recommendation and a vote on which alternate plan we plan on using. Also, there was a presentation done on the regional housing needs allocation process. So that was kind of the AMBAG meeting. I did attend, as Supervisor De La Cruz also said, the Seminole Health Care District kickoff dinner for the strategic planning retreat. Saturday, I was honored to attend and participate in Granite Rock's Algebra Academy. And this is a Algebra Academy which was the brainchild of former President and CEO Bruce Wolfer. Came up with about 4 or 5 years ago of doing a week-long math academy for 8th graders. And I'm proud to say we had 3 schools from our county participating, Romas Elementary, San Juan Elementary, and Trespinas Elementary. And I was able to participate and hand out some of the awards, and that was Saturday. And last night, there was a presentation at the community center, and first picture of the PowerPoint had 2 very handsome men standing in front of our electric vehicle taken out in our county parking lot. And basically, this was the Monterey Bay plug-in electric vehicle readiness plan. And there were members from the community, and there's supposed to be a member from the Air Board and a member from the AMBAG. There, they were not able to attend, so other people took their place, and they talked about getting ready for plug-ins vehicles. I know our back row, members of our back row just loves our electric vehicle. I'm sorry they were not there last night. I think they were at a city council meeting. But if anybody has any comments on the plan, they can contact Emily at, I'm going to spell this out, EGLANVILL at echoact.org until September 15th, and they would love to hear some comments on their plan. And I think at the echoact.org you can bring up their plan and comment on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Barrios?
Well, let me give the opinion on the two handsome men that were in the front.
Wait a minute. Now, who are the two handsome men?
You are the board expert.
They are handsome. Yes, I do have three announcements, Mr. Chair. I want to say that Assemblyman Luis Alejo invited local elected officials to meet with him in Watsonville to meet the Vice President of El Salvador. His name is Salvador Sanchez Seren, and he was here for two reasons. One of his cities became a sister city to Watsonville, so that was very exciting. And he is also running for president in 2014 of El Salvador, so he wants to strengthen the public relations with the United States. That was a very nice visit with him. I also attended the San Benito Hospital District Strategic Plan dinner, and I want to say that this is the first time that the community has been invited and elected officials to participate. So it was a very interesting presentation, and I think they would like, I don't think so, I know they would like us to call Board of Trustees from the hospital district or the administrators if we have any input. So I plan to do that. And then I also visited some North County sites with Fire Chief O'Connor, and we visited two areas that are both either, one was near the airport and the other at the airport, and they're excellent locations to house a station, and that would reduce the response time. So he is pursuing those sites and trying to negotiate some sort of a rental agreement. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Rivas?
Yeah, I did want to add the discussion about AMBAG. So this previous week, our AMBAG meeting is one of the longer meetings we've had, and it was intriguing and kind of entertaining as well, because we talk about this sustainable, the community's, it's a strategy plan, and there were two alternatives, and both alternatives were identical for San Benito County. You know, I think it was increased. I think the proposals in both alternatives were an increase in transit from Hollister to Gilroy and Gilroy to the Salinas area. But so we ended up staying there till what, Supervisor Mons, about 10, about 9. We got home about, a while after 10. So we sat there the entire time watching elected officials from Monterey County and Santa Cruz County argue, and it was absolutely fascinating. Because they had their routes, they have they have the investments in rail, they have the investments in buses and all these other alternative energy projects in their counties, and so when you have those many elected officials, and so it takes us back where here in San Benito County we're a small community, and things may get uncivil here at times, but in the end we're all friends, and it was good. So, but we will have an update on this discussion we're having at AMBAG. I believe that we have to make a hard decision at our next AMBAG meeting, which is, I believe, September 11th. So we would encourage those of you who want to hear a good discussion, and all this, how this is going to play into our general plan also. So thanks a lot. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I'm going to pull item 14. Would the public like to pull any of the items? With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, hearing none. Sorry, Steve, to do this to you, but I just had to. Just had to.
It's come to be expected.
And it's not you. My concern is that we're going to do this third amendment, and all our contracts are, again, with these consultants, not to exceed, and then now we're going to exceed and add on $10,000 more. And through the whole agenda item, as I reviewed it last night, I didn't see a real good reason why we should pay this consulting firm $10,000 more on a very, very simple set of negotiations that has taken 3 years just to acquire the land. And I'm at a complete loss that, I could be enlightened, of course, but how this is not total incompetence.
I can try to explain that for you, and rest assured that I understand where you're coming from with contracts and consultants, and I'm very sensitive to that. And one of the things probably I should have done was prepare you for this a little bit, so you would have a hint that this was coming on. This particular consultant is working as a property negotiator for acquiring properties for the Hospital Road Bridge. That's what this is for. She's had to deal with 6 different property owners, and we have come to agreement with 5 of those property owners. So on the original scope was for negotiating all those contracts. The one that's left, unfortunately, is not going very smoothly. We've actually got county counsel's office involved and got a county counsel specialist to take a look at the process, because frankly it's probably going to go to condemnation. So these services for this amendment are to assist the legal team to make sure our case is buttoned down and very tight going into the condemnation process, if that's what the board so chooses to do when that comes before them, because that's something that the board is willing to decide at a separate hearing if they would like to pursue that. We are operating under the mindset that this is a very important project for the county, and we are operating under the premise that that decision, when it comes to the Board of Supervisor, we want to be prepared to move with that process as quickly as possible. So what we want to do before the board makes that decision, or in preparation for the board making that decision, is to have the legal team and the expertise in place so that we can move fairly quickly through that process to get the last property acquired. That once this property is acquired, everything else is set to go for actually construction of that bridge. So this particular contractor, the consultant, what their job is, is to negotiate and then to make sure that we have a nice portfolio that can be looked across in terms of the legal T's are crossed and I's are dotted, to make sure that we have a smooth process if it does go through the legal process. That's a nutshell of why this particular consultant has had a couple of different previous amendments and why we're going forward with this.
Well, it just concerns me. It's, been 3 years in the making, and ultimately, the way I negotiate, or what I would have done was, here's my 3 appraisals. We'll entertain your appraisal and try to meet in the middle. If not, then we'll do the condemnation and be done with it and move right along. But it's costing us money with engineering work because we're kind of held up, and I could support this on a condition, and maybe somebody could tell me if I'm washed up, but based on, we paid the $10,000 after we have possession of the property, not as like the terms of the previous contracts that they send in an invoice and then we come back and another $10,000 or something along those lines. Can we do something like that just to send a message to these consultants that it's not be that easy to come back for amendment after you've already
I don't really know the answer to that question. I mean, it would be up to whether the consultant is willing to defer his or her or its compensation until after the job. In this particular case, based on what I know, as Steve alluded to, there is one recalcitrant property owner who has hired his own attorney, who has submitted an appraisal that is far in excess of the appraisals that the county has obtained. Unfortunately, the law requires that the county pay only the fair market value for the property. So there isn't, and perhaps a typical negotiation, the ability to say, here's our 3 appraisals, here's your appraisals, we'll meet you in the middle. Legally, we can't do that because that would be overpaying for the property, and that's prevented by the statute. So that's part of the reason why this project has stalled. The attorney for the landowner is very aggressive. It's really not Ms. Wood's fault that she has exceeded the length and amount of her contract because, as Steve said, 5 of the 6 property owners have settled. So she has done her job in 85% of the cases, and she's been working hard to try and settle this last one, but it's just beyond her ability. So to answer your question directly, if you don't want to pay Ms. Wood
an additional $10,000, then she would have, right at the moment, then she would probably say to you, well, then I'm not working. Perhaps she might say, that's fine, I'll wait until after the project. My guess would be that she would not continue to provide the county with her services. But you can certainly instruct Steve to go back and make that suggestion to her and see what response you get.
Because it seems, you know, reading this, that doesn't include the condemnation attorney that we'll have to hire.
Right. So I guess one thing to keep in mind is that these are project monies, not general fund monies.
Right. I got that in mind.
Okay,
yeah.
so it's not coming, okay. So, and that's true. This money does not include counsel that has been retained already to start the condemnation proceedings. That will be a separate expense that will come out of the project monies. I don't know how much that's going to cost because I don't know how complex or how long the condemnation proceedings will go, but that's part of the process. If you have a recalcitrant landowner who's absolutely refusing to settle, ultimately you have to take that person to court. We've been trying to avoid that because, as the chair pointed out, it's costly and time-consuming and delay. But in this case, it looks like that's the only option that we're going to have.
Do we still need the consultant if it's a go to condemnation and it's a go to lawyers anyway?
Yeah, because basically the lawyers need the support from the history to make sure everything is done and what negotiations have had taken place. Because what happens is the negotiator represents the county, and what is said in those discussions, the legal team needs to be fully aware of what's been said and how it's been phrased. Because what will happen is the other side will portray something in a certain fashion, and we need the appraiser to come back and identify, possibly even under oath, that this is what actually was said as opposed to what's been represented. So
Ms. Wood becomes a very important fact witness for the county because she is the person who can explain the negotiations up to the date of the initiation of litigation. She is somewhat like an expert witness on behalf of the county. So it would be very hard to prepare the case without her services. And again, I don't know, I can't speak for whether she would be willing to provide those services if she wasn't getting paid, at least at the moment. It seems unlikely, but again, we could ask her if she's willing to delay that. But she is necessary. The attorneys will rely on her in the litigation. She has all the knowledge in her head or in her files. Without her, we would have one hand tied behind our back in the condemnation proceedings.
All right, yeah, it's such a high priority project. It's about public safety. It really is about public safety on that road, and there's no bridge or project that we're working on that's more important than that hospital road. Supervisor Munzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say, you know, the county was served by a low water crossing for basically forever, and we're not allowed to put that low water crossing in. That road has been out for over 15 years. Or going on 15 years. I too had concerns like you because I saw that 5 months ago we had Amendment 2 come across this desk, and now here 5 months later we have another Amendment 3 coming across. So I talked to Steve yesterday. Having gotten into this project midstream and into another project that's very close in the neighborhood, I know how difficult it is to negotiate with property owners. I also know that in the other instance, we did not have the same negotiator, and it turned into a nightmare. And so I think this negotiator has done a good job for us, and I can totally support this amendment. And the other thing, that if we start tying her hands, then we're giving fuel and ammunition to the party that doesn't want to sell to us, and they'll know all they have to do is drag this out, install, and then we won't want to, you know, keep putting the money towards it. So I think that'll be sending the wrong message if we don't go forward with this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Barrios?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with you. I'm sorry that I didn't pull this. I didn't scroll down far enough, but I should have pulled this because I had it earmarked. You asked if you were washed up. You're not. I think it's our responsibility to keep this on track, and that place has been washed up for 15 years, as Supervisor Munzer said. What I was concerned about is that the contract has 4 months left. Why are we renewing so early if this work can be completed in the next 4 months, I would hope? I can see extending the dollars, but do we need to absolutely extend the contract?
I think at the same point in time, it doesn't do any harm for us to extend the contract in case the proceedings go on longer than expected. I mean, we should wrap it up fairly quickly, but at the same juncture, if we're altering it for one, it's kind of, it helps us in case something gets dragged out in court or something like that.
Okay.
And the time, because the time is being extended longer, does not mean she's going to work slower. That's not the point of it. It's just to prepare and protect ourselves so we don't have to come back and just do an amendment for time in the middle of something that was going on. So it's just.
Well, I appreciate that you said that it's not going to extend the time. They're going to try to get it done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it's to get it done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, because it is a priority.
Yes.
It has been too long, and any extra time really doesn't serve us well. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? I'll open it up for public comment. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board, and I'll make a motion to approve this amendment, and also state that I hope we don't soft shoe this any longer. Just get the work done, condemn their property, and move on.
Second.
And build this. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. We'll move on to our public hearings. CEO Espinoza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this particular item is item number 16 on the agenda. This will be presented to us by Margie Riopel, a management analyst, and this is going to be considering the adoption of a resolution to accept certain fees charged by the County of San Benito for transaction services provided. And we have Margie here to discuss this. Thank you, Margie.
Good morning. To provide you a little background with why we're here today, in April of 2013, your board approved a new ordinance for animal administration citations. And the board also approved policies and procedures to implement the programs. One of the processes discussed was the option for the public to make payments using credit cards and e-checks through a web-based process. That process will require fees and working with another vendor. So today we're here where this public hearing is required for consideration of the proposed resolution establishing fees for service provided through a third-party vendor to process payments through credit, debit, and ATM services on behalf of the county. A request that the Board of Supervisors consider adoption of this resolution setting the fees that are attached as Attachment A. Also, there is a request for the Board of Supervisors to approve and authorize the CAO to sign agreements with LexisNexis Vital Check Network to provide credit, debit, ATM transaction service, either web-based for the process or in person upon adoption of the resolution of setting the fees. There is no cost to the county for the equipment or the service provided, and all departments have access to this system if they want to participate. The cost of the processing is passed on to the consumers or the persons using the system for their transactions. The first agency to use this service will be the Code Enforcement Officer. Other departments have showed interest in getting involved with this process because it will help with payments. Those are Public Works, Planning, and the Ag Commissioners. So today, you're obligated to hold this public hearing to consider the adoption of the resolution to accept certain fees charged by the county for San Benito County, for the county, for transaction services provided, adopt that resolution imposing the fees to be charged, and formally authorize the acceptance of credit cards, debit cards, and electronic checks, and also approve and authorize the county administrative officer to sign agreements with LexisNexis Vital Check Network to provide credit, debit, ATM transaction services for the county. And I'm here to answer any questions about any of the materials that you've received in your packet.
Any questions from Supervisor Barrios?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Margie, the 3% on credit cards, if, for instance, the tax, the tax collector wants to use this service, I know they have a plan already or a credit card merchant that they deal with, but I mean, those are extreme charges. And if you have a $150 charge, so it looks on the surface like $2.50, not a lot of money. But when you do the 3% on a credit card, you could be racking up a pretty good cost for the
That's right.
taxpayer.
Interestingly enough, I'm reviewing an AIT item for September 10th for the treasurer tax collector specifically. They're not going to use Vital Check. They're using official payments and Elevon contract. And you're right, the fees really do add up when you add it on credit card. And it's through the third-party processor, and there's no limit on the amount of fees. I mean, it is the percentage. You can get a flat rate if you do it for a debit card, but then it's different from using a credit card because it comes, so there's that problem. But that's going to come back for the September 10th meeting.
Yeah, I would just recommend that is very clear to whoever is charging on a credit card, because if I were to pay my taxes on a credit card, I'd be paying a couple $100 probably, and that's extreme.
It is extreme, and we're talking about citations that will be relatively less than, although there could be higher fees collected through planning or public works for services they render. So that's something that will be disclosed in the information to those consumers if they want to use that process. Remember, they still could come in and pay it themselves with
Right.
check. So, I mean, it's just an option available to those people who would like to have that service.
Okay. And then the last thing is that on the resolution itself, at the very bottom, the wording on right before the date needs to be changed for the actual signed copy. It reads held on the day of 20th day of August, so it's not clear and just needs to be corrected.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, maybe another way of looking at it, Supervisor Barrios, if you're on the last day and it's a 3% charge to the credit card and it's a 10% penalty if you're late with the taxes.
That's true. But I think my only concern is just make sure that the person that's using it knows what they're paying, and that there's no surprise.
That's very true. Supervisor De La Cruz?
Well, let me enlighten you guys from a private business perspective. A couple years ago, like all other businesses, they were short on cash. Cash management was an issue, and our company, a lot of our employees live paycheck to paycheck, and our operations, it's a fixed asset management, and that's my responsibility. And I, bonehead me now, I decided to pay our taxes on our company credit card. And let me tell you something. I called Mary Lou and I asked Mary Lou, it's due tomorrow. I'm going to pay with a credit card. Here's a credit card. Ran it. Oh, by the way, Jaime, there's a 3% charge. It came out to $227.
My point exactly.
And I said, this is insane. I will support paying our property taxes, our business taxes, absolutely. However, are we providing a service to the community or an option? And I think, you're handicapping the public by businesses making big bucks. I think we need to go back, Margie, and compare with other companies, credit card companies, and see who gives us a better deal. I just can't accept this 3%.
Okay, Supervisor Munzer?
Okay, Margie, this is the cost to the county for providing the option. Is that
No.
No?
This cost is passed on to the consumer who uses.
No, but
So-
we're being charged this.
No, we are not. We are not being charged at all. They're providing the equipment, and they're providing the service. They provide this service to many governmental agencies. It's a payment processing operation.
So we're making money off of this?
No, we're collecting our fees that they owe us. If a citation is billed to you and you owe us, you can either come in and pay cash, or you have an option to pay by credit card.
Okay.
On the web.
Okay, so the $2.50, I paid that
Mhm.
citation by credit card.
Right.
And so I get tagged $2.50.
Correct.
Whose pocket is that $2.50?
Goes into the people that own the company.
Okay, it's a third party.
Yes,
That's
third
what
party.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to
It's a
get at.
third-party
We're-
agreement.
It's not ending up in the county
No.
pocket. It's ending up in a third party. So if we didn't charge this, we would be making less. If we have a $25 citation,
Mhm.
then we would only get I can't do the math, $22.50 instead of the full 25.
Well, that's
correct?
not how it's set up. This is not how it's set up, though. This is set up to be passed on to the consumer.
Right. The problem exists, it's a legal reason. when you use your Visa or MasterCard to pay for something, as you know, being a store owner, there's a 2%, 3% charge on that, the use of the MasterCard. And so when you go to Kmart or Walmart, Safeway and use it, it's Kmart, Walmart, or Safeway that generally picks up the 3%. Either they raise their prices or they eat it.
I'm fully aware of that.
The county cannot do that because that would be a gift of public funds. Because the county, you know, if you owe $25 to the county would only be collecting $23 if it ate the 3%. So the way around that is the counties have entered into these contracts with third-party vendors. And on the website, when you go to pay with your credit card, it's very clear that says the county does not collect the fee and it cannot discount the amount that you owe it to eat the fee. You have to pay the $25 plus the 3%. That goes to Visa or MasterCard. That's their 3% payment. It would be illegal for us to eat that 3% fee.
So in Supervisor Dela Cruz's example, he had to pay $250. Right. If he didn't pay that $250, our treasurer would have collected $250 less on property tax.
Yes, that's exactly right. And obviously the county could not be put in that position.
Okay.
Well, hold on a minute. No, it doesn't matter what the property tax is. We're going to pay that, if whatever dollar that is. That's just an added-on cost to us, the credit card, as a convenience.
But we don't, what I'm trying to get to, and make sure everybody on the board understands, because I do get this, because I always had to pay this every month for accepting credit cards.
Yeah, me too.
If we did not pay this as a county, we would be collecting less money.
Right. True.
And so we have to put this fee on, right, just as Matt right. said. Where I was going to go with it, and I don't think I will now, but instead of having a $2.50 per transaction charge, I was going to just suggest that it be something in the nature of whatever we are charged, and that's what has to be paid. So that if this transaction fee goes up to $3, let's say, by the third party, you're going to have to come back to us. Somebody's going to have to remember to come back to us and have that raised, correct?
Yes.
Who's going to be tasked with that? That if this
right.
transaction fee ever goes up,
right.
that somebody's back in
We
here.
really do need to have a public hearing before we, it would be nice to be able to do that type of fee and just have it escalate, but I think that we would need to bring it back and
right.
amend the fee.
Okay.
Yes, and if we weren't able to charge this fee, then we wouldn't be able to use the vendor. So that's the other consequence. If we don't approve this fee, then the vendor might not provide the service, and then individuals wouldn't have that option of
right.
paying by credit card.
But I guess my question is,
right.
in this public hearing and in this action today, we have to set a dollar amount, or we have,
yes.
or can we set?
Yes, you're approving the fees.
We have to set a dollar amount
yes.
to that fee.
Yes.
It's part of the contract, though. It's part of the fees in the contract that you're approving.
Oh, gotcha.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And I think that puts us in the best position if anyone ever challenged the fee, that it has gone before the board.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean.
I guess, well, I'm not
yes.
wanting to take the fee out. I guess I was trying to say, you know, something to the effect that whatever we are charged, that is passed on to the consumer.
Right.
But so as long as somebody
yeah.
remembers
yeah.
that if this fee ever goes up, they're back in here.
Right. We need to do that.
And we're doing this again and adjusting the fee amount.
Right.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
It would most likely require another contract by them. They would probably insist upon another contract.
Is this the best deal we could have got for the public?
We looked at several, and this is the one agency that handled governmental type payments. There are some out there that are just open to the public for use, but they're not so prone to do all governmental type city, county payments.
So you're talking, really the biggest ticket item is property taxes.
Right, and this one is not for the property taxes. This is for citations, maybe some planning fees, public works fees. The ag commissioner charges some fees. It's just, and this is really a convenience for the consumer,
yes,
who may not be able to get down here to pay that, and is commuting back and forth and wants to pay the payment.
Okay,
And there
Marjorie.
is another one that's going to come forward to the board regarding property taxes. It's going to piggyback on the state contract through Elevon. And I think it's a slightly less percentage. It may be like 2.38%, but it's only a slight difference.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I apologize, I was kind of passionate about this. So, Mr. Chair, we need to put everything consistent, all the departments then.
Well, to be able to add on to the one that Mary Lou had was going to be more costly for us. That's why we chose this. It has all the equipment and all the services rendered, and will make the deposits. So this seemed more flexible for the smaller counties that don't, the smaller agencies that don't have a lot of staffing to handle the deposits and transactions, et cetera. It's just another mechanism to get that done.
I would just like to add that currently the clerk recorder's office uses the LexisNexis Vital Check system. We've had it for many years. Your board approved the use in that department. This is really an expansion of that same program.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you for that input.
And just one clarification from a Public Works standpoint, certain transactions we have out there dealing with the public for park rentals and facilities for that nature, we do not accept checks, because what happens is we get the payment right before the event, and it's been practiced with some folks, they would cancel the check after the event, and therefore they get the rental for free. We have a difficult time collecting that. So we have a policy for rental for those fees of cash only. So when folks come to our counter and they're not aware of that, they then need to go to pay an ATM fee somewhere else, which is probably very similar to what this transaction fee would be by using a non-system ATM. So the convenience factor, we're really looking forward to something like this, to have those people be able to be to the counter one time.
Thank you. Supervisor Barrios?
Just one more comment, Mr. Chair. You made a very, very good point about, paying 3% or 10% of it were related to property taxes. I had somebody call me on April the 10th at 9 o'clock at night, worried because they forgot all about their taxes. And fortunately, we did have in place a system that they could go and pay, and they probably chose to pay whatever percentage it was rather than the 10%. So you make a good point, and what I like to say is that we need to, I support this. This is important that we have this option available for our community, and they can decide whether to use it or not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's another factor that I think the board should keep in mind on this. I don't think we're due better than 3%. Everybody I've talked to, that's the bare minimum for credit card companies, is that some from the private sector, sometimes don't see that charge because the private sector could set their prices at a profitable margin to absorb that cost. I don't think it's fair to the taxpayers that we do not recover these costs. With that, we'll open it up for the public hearing. Anybody would like to comment on this? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for correction.
Mr. Chair, I will go ahead and make a motion to adopt the resolution number 2013-59, imposing the fees to be charged for debit, credit, electronic check transaction services, and formally authorizing the acceptance of credit cards, debit cards, and electronic checks, and approve and authorize the county CAO to sign agreements with LexisNexis Vital Check Network, Inc. to provide credit, debit, ATM transaction services for the county.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
Oppose.
4-1. Thank you, Margie. Now we'll move to our regular agenda, and if the board doesn't mind and our staff doesn't mind, I see our new, hopefully second-tier attorney here. If I can move his item up, so as interesting as our board meetings are, I'm sure he has other things to do today. So we'll move to item 20. That probably throws a wrinkle in your presentation, I guess, for you, Mr. Granger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the board is aware, the county about 1 month ago sent out an RFQ looking for proposals for services to be performed under a second-tier indigent defense service contract for the public defender. And responses in this matter were due on August 7th, and those responses were submitted to the county. The county staff reviewed them in conjunction with the ad hoc committee composed of the chair and Supervisor Barrios, and a decision was reached that the county would offer its contract to the law office of Arthur Cantu, and Mr. Cantu and myself met and we discussed the terms and conditions of the contract, and I'm pleased to report to the board that we were successful in reaching a contract. That is the contract that is before the board today for its acceptance. Mr. Cantu has already signed on it. So the ad hoc committee might want to make some comments, but basically I am pleased to report that we have a contract before the board for its approval today.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. Supervisor Barrios, I'm sure you have a comment.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. During the budget process, we talked about, Supervisor Botello and I, about how we were going to pursue additional savings in the public defender budget. And I'm very pleased to say that we did find ways. There will be other items on the agenda pertaining to those cost savings. And I want to thank our staff, Matt especially, because he worked with us and he followed direction from the ad hoc committee, pursued the attorneys, talked to them, and made sure that our message was clear of what we wanted to do. And I think that we have been very successful in what we have before you today. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. And if I add on, we're very fortunate that attorney that has been a defense attorney working in long-standing in our community and is very good at what he does, that decided to take on this contract, and we're very fortunate to be able to count on his services going forward. Any questions from the board?
Mr. Chair, just the agenda says 75.5 and the contract says 75. That's all. So there must be.
The contract amount is for $75,000. I believe it's just a typo on the AIT.
Perfect.
Okay. I'll open it up for public comment.
Good morning again, Marty Richmond from Hollister. I just want to comment on this, and I'll save myself a couple of trips to the podium by commenting on the related items that you're going to get on the agenda shortly. And just to say thank you to the board. Congratulations. I give you hell when I'm not happy with your decisions. I think you deserve credit. The staff deserves credit, especially the analysts who gathered and analyzed the information, the county council, Mr. Granger, and the board for basically doing a good analysis. I'm not always happy with the kind of analysis, operational analysis that is put forward. You know I'm a complainer, but you did a good job on this one. You broke down how the money was used by cases and so forth. You saw an opportunity to fulfill our obligation to defend those people who do not have the wherewithal to defend themselves, and also to fulfill your obligation to the public to do it at a reasonable cost that still provides a good service. So thank you very much, and you deserve to take some credit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, may I say something? I failed to thank Margie Riopel, who put a lot of work into this and really did a lot of research to make sure that what we were bringing forth was fair. So thank you, Margie, as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Mr. Cantu.
Thank you, Chairman of the Board, Board of Supervisors, and the public. Let me just say to you, I've been doing criminal law now for 19 years, and it's not for the faint of heart. Sometimes when you think you're just representing, they said, you represent criminals, the guys that are guilty. Well, it's not just that, because for almost every criminal, they have a mother and father, or they have children, or they have siblings. And so you deal with families. And then, of course, you've got to deal with the district attorney's office, and you've got to deal with law enforcement and the sheriff's department. the police department, and so, like I said, it's not for the faint of heart. I'll take on this project. We'll do it for a year as the contract calls for, and then see where it goes from there. But thank you for the consideration. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Seeing no more public comments, I'll close the public comment period and bring it back to the board for an action.
Mr. Chair,
make a
I'll
motion.
move that
Oh.
we approve and authorize Chair to sign the contract with Law Office of Arthur Cantu for second-tier indigenous, the defense, the services for a term to begin September 1st, 2013 through August 30th, 2014 for an amount not to exceed $75,000.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, thank you. And we'll move back to 17.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this particular item is going to be presented to us by Janelle Cox, our management analyst, and she's going to be reviewing with your board the general tax ballot measure, the proposed general tax measure for November 2014. This particular item was something that your board requested back in the beginning of the calendar year. And today what we're going to do is we're going to present to you, I think in a PowerPoint presentation, our findings and giving some input to your board and then requesting direction from you. Thank you.
Well, it looks like the machine took a nap, so we're trying to get it back up. It's on? You all received a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and there are copies in the back for the general public. Turn the thing off and then turn it back on.
One thing I'd like to add, Mr. Chair, is that there was a lot of input from County Council, from Joe Paul Gonzalez, our elections office, as well as administration. So there's been a lot of work that's gone into this. Just want to make sure that the board's aware of all the work, and Janelle's going to be presenting that work as well.
Thank you.
We might have to take a little break here.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break and as
5 should
our,
be okay.
oh, what's that?
5 should be okay.
5-minute break. Thanks. Call the meeting back to order and start with the general tax measure. Janelle?
Okay, thank you for that break. Today we're going to talk about a general tax measure proposed for San Benito County, and the report before you today has been coordinated with County Council and your clerk, auditor, recorder offices, so I thank them very much for their assistance with the development of this item for you today. The U.S. economy has been severely affected by the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, caused by the mortgage and housing crisis and unemployment. San Benito County was not spared, and the county and its municipalities approved solutions to meet the needs of the community with the reduced revenues. In January 2013, your board directed staff to analyze the feasibility of pursuing a general tax measure in 2014, to prepare a budget proposal for the fiscal year 13-14 to finance the cost to develop this ballot measure, and then to complete an updated public opinion poll late in 2013. So let's first look at the county's response to the reduced revenues. The general fund balance has been allocated the last 4 years to balance the annual budget, reducing the fund balance by $13 million, 52%. In 4 years. 85 general funded positions have been eliminated since 2006-2007. The reduced staffing levels have resulted in office closures for the lunch period, some modified public office hours, and the reduction of your library hours to just Monday through Thursday. Communications and fire services have been consolidated. Call management systems have been implemented in several different departments. Mandated services have been strained. Maintenance frequency has been reduced. Some programs have been eliminated. There's increased backlogs and adjusted staff responsibilities. County personnel have also been impacted with furloughs, frozen step increases, deferred COLAs, and negotiations continue with the unions. So today we're going to discuss if the levy of a transaction and use tax is a viable source of revenue for the county. The state legislature authorized counties to levy transaction and use taxes back in 1969. A transaction and use tax is imposed on the same goods and merchandise as the local sales tax, except that it's allocated to the district where the goods are delivered or placed into use. And in the context of transaction and use tax, a district is a taxing jurisdiction. So the county is a district. The city of Hollister is a district. So for walk-in retail stores, the Board of Equalization assumes that the merchandise will be used where the store is located. However, sellers and lessors of vehicles, vessels, or licensed aircraft that are they're required to collect the tax for the district where the item is to be registered. So this eliminates a resident going to San Jose, for instance, to purchase a product. The dealer would have to collect the tax for our county, for the jurisdiction. So let's first go over some of the guidelines for the establishment of a general transaction and use tax. First, the tax would be approved by 2/3 vote of the Board of Supervisors and then by a majority of the qualified voters in the county. The tax would be levied over the entire county, both incorporated and unincorporated areas.
Oh, excuse me, it's Cox, Supervisor Munzer has a question.
Nelson, we as a county cannot impose a tax that would be just the unincorporated areas?
No. We, I think they're talking about you. That was an
I'll
issue.
repeat the question for the audience.
Oh,
So we as a county cannot impose a sales tax for just the unincorporated areas?
No, you cannot. It has to be blanketed over the full county.
Okay. Thank you.
A TUT may be levied in multiples of 1/8%. The combined rate of all the taxes imposed in a county shall not exceed 2%. So, for instance, Hollister has 1% currently. That would mean the maximum that the county could levy would be another %. The Board of Supervisors determines the allocation of the revenue after voter approval. And there are implementation and ongoing administrative costs. So the next few slides, I'm going to go over each of these bullets and provide an example of its applicability to San Benito County. Let's first look at the TUT approval process. For the November 2014 ballot, the county would begin the process with the adoption of an ordinance in May, and it would be approved by 2/3 of a vote of your board. This does begin the election process, and the ballot measure would be drafted and included on the November 2014 ballot for approval by a majority of the qualified voters. The full implementation timeline was included in your report, but I'm not going to go over that at this time. So as we discussed, this idea of a use tax is not new, and if you look at the statewide data, communities are willing to support government services. 90% of the state's population lives in one or more transaction and use tax district. There's 169 active special tax districts at this time. 43 of them are countywide and 126 are municipalities. 48% of the counties in California levy at least one special tax. 54% of the county levies are at the 0.5% level, and 60% of the special taxes have a sunset. Now let's look at the application of a TUT in San Benito County. A TUT would be levied over the entire county, incorporated and unincorporated areas. It may be levied again in multiples of 0.125%. The combined rate of all special taxes imposed in the county shall not exceed that 2%, which we talked about previously. So the current sales tax rate in California is 7.5%. Hollister has the additional 1%, and San Juan Bautista an additional 0.75%. So as we talked about, the highest rate the county could levy is an additional 1%. So what this chart in the middle of the graph sheet shows you is that the current tax rates for the cities of San Juan Bautista and Hollister, with a 1% added onto it, what would the tax rate be in that particular area? The second set of numbers talks about adding 0.5% and what the resulting tax rate would be. And then the final set of numbers is related to adding just 0.25%. So if you recall from our previous screen, 54% of the tax levies by the counties are at the 0.5% level. And so that's the middle set of numbers. If 0.5% was a levy was approved by the voters, the tax in San Juan Bautista would be 8.75. Hollister would be at 9. The county would be at 8. So now let's talk about the revenue that would be generated. This particular chart will tell you at a 1% transaction and use tax, the county would potentially receive an additional $5 million annually. Currently, of the 7.5% sales tax, 1% of that is allocated as our local share. So the percentages you see on the chart represent the actual sales tax revenue that has been received for the first quarter of 2013. So you can see that Hollister generates 69% of the tax here. San Benito County is 28%, and San Juan Bautista is at 3%. So applying those percentages to the additional, to a 1% TUT, or the additional $5 million revenue, the county could potentially receive an additional $1.4 million. The next chart tells you if a 0.5% TUT was approved by the voters, the revenue generated for the county would be $2.5 million, and San Benito County's specific share would be $700,000, 28% of that. And then finally, the last slide demonstrates a 0.25%. And at 28%, San Benito County could potentially receive an additional $350,000. And then finally, the administration of transaction and use tax do have costs. We would be required to execute agreements with the State Board of Equalization for implementation of the tax. There's one-time preparation costs that are shared by all of the taxing districts who have ballot issues approved during that particular election, and the maximum amount that we would be charged is $175,000. So that's sort of an unknown. You don't know how many other districts would go through the process at the same time, November 2014. And then there's an ongoing administrative costs that generally are at about 0.5%, but could be as high as 1.5% of the revenue collected. So in order to reach decision today, there's several areas in which your board needs to discuss and then give direction to staff. There's concern about the potential for a total sales tax with an additional 1%, in that the TUT then the total tax in Hollister would be 9.5%, San Juan Bautista would be 9.25%. So the municipalities could rescind their district transaction and use tax. Then they would be yeah. Well, the rescission would be effective and then contingent upon the approval of a countywide TUT.
Let's be respectful to the
Yeah.
presentation.
It's an option. It's an idea. It's a thought. That's a possibility that they could rescind them. And then we, as a county, would execute tax sharing agreements with those two cities to provide them the the additional revenue that they would lose by rescinding their tax. So that's an option. They could rescind it. We could do a tax sharing agreement with them to provide them the revenue that they would lose by rescinding their tax. If that's not palatable, your board can consider a TUT that is less than the 1%. Maybe just consider blanketing the full county with 0.5%. Your board also needs to consider, would it like to sunset the TUT? As we previously noted, that 60% of the district levies in the state of California do have a sunset. Hollister's TUT sunsets in 2018. I mean, so we could establish a TUT that sunsets with theirs. San Juan Bautista does not have a sunset. So if they rescind their tax, they would have to go back to their voters to ask to reassess them with a tax levy. And then finally, the timing of the ballot measure. Voter turnouts tend to be greater during presidential elections. So your board has the option to consider whether it wants to place this item on the ballot for 2014 or wait till 2016. The issue is that it doesn't resolve your current revenue shortfalls. And then the polling and public outreach and communications. Your board directed that we come back to you potentially with another poll in December or late December 2013. And so what was included in your packet was a RFP for a community, a polling and public outreach service. This group could work tandem with the county as we develop the measure. There could be community meetings to educate and gather input from the community on the proposed tax measure. And then the firm would also conduct the poll, for instance, in December of 2013. So you would have the data available that would the county support a proposed ballot measure. And just for your reference, Salinas has been successful. They have a successful model for a transaction and use tax of 1%. The voters approved that in perpetuity in November of 2014. And what they do is they have an advisory board. They go to the public each year to say, okay, we've got this additional revenue coming in. How would you like to see it allocated? And so they have developed this confidence in the relationship with the community that there's trust that the community is going to approve an additional tax, and the city of Salinas is going to work with them on how those dollars are allocated.
So Janelle, excuse me, Mr. Chair, if I could ask, it doesn't sunset when it's in perpetuity.
No,
then
that-
it just can, but they do take it back to the community to discuss how to use it.
How to spend the dollars each year. They do that for their budget processes,
Okay.
community.
So when you put something like this on the ballot, you don't have to be specific about how you're going to use that, like the city did with their public safety. They were not real
I
specific.
think you could take information, gather information, and educate the public as to the current status of the county's financial situation. You couldn't, in your measure, specify what the purpose of the tax.
You do
Because
that-
it's a general tax, so you couldn't
So then you do
specify.
that after, like
Do that
the
after.
committee, and say, this is what we'd like to, because if we decided that the parks and library were the primary thing, then we would have to get support from the community, make a recommendation, and they would have to support it by committee? Is that the way it would work?
I think your board would make the final decision on the
You would
allocation
make
of the
final
dollars, yeah.
decision. Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chair.
Any other questions for Ms. Cox? Okay, you could continue with your presentation, or?
That was really the end of my presentation. What I'm hoping from you is that you will discuss the various options available to you and then provide direction to staff as to whether we're going to proceed with a proposed ballot measure. or the RFP so that we can get the firm on board and do another poll in December of 2013.
Supervisor Munzer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Janelle, on page 259 of our agenda package, and it looks like page 5 of your presentation, you have 7 things you're requesting this board to do. Line 6, or number 6 of that, it ends with talking about the City of Hollister and the City of San Juan rescinding, and you put down TOT tax.
Oh, typo. Sorry.
And that's what I figured. But that is I want to direct our CAO that needs to be a discussion for another day. We need to look at what we're charging our TOT tax also, because we're 8% for our TOT, and I believe the area is around 12%. So I hope we can put that on the agenda. But my comment on this item would be, I think this needs to go back to intergovernment and see if what the cities of Hollister and San Juan feels about this before we go forward.
Thank you, Supervisor Munzer. Supervisor De La Cruz?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that we as a community need to step up to the plate and help support our specifically our older town, Hollister, in our neighborhoods. I'm seeing too many roads, too many streets, too many lights being degraded. Quality of life in those neighborhoods is beginning to be a little scary. I know that if it's a city with Hollister with the push with the whole new infrastructure system, we're talking millions of dollars. And I think that if they're going to go in that direction, they're going to have to make sure they basically wipe out a lot of the current roads we have right now and then put new services, including a whole new infrastructure. And I kind of like the idea of Supervisor Munzer's that we need to go back to the Intergovernment Committee. This is a one-time opportunity that we're going to go back to the public and ask them for their support on a TUT or sales tax, whatever you want to call it. And I think we need to look at where the needs are needed in this community, because the City of Hollister used to use RDA money to repair or to improve or to replace those community needs, and the RDA does not exist anymore. And somehow we need to be realistic of what we have in front of us and look at our inventory, and every day it is getting worse. Every day is getting worse. If you were to, and I'm not an expert, I'm not an engineer expert, it might be, an overstatement, but I'm willing to bet that if you flushed Hollister toilets so many of them, that you're going to have a lot of problems. And I think those kind of issues need to be addressed. And it's not capping on the City of Hollister. I'm not capping at the county. I just said we as citizens need to really have a real talk, a real discussion among our community and say, this is what we need to do. We feel that these inventories need to be addressed first.
Thank you, Supervisor De La Cruz. Supervisor Rivas.
Yeah, I have a couple of things. I apologize, Mr. Chair, if I'm all over the board. But, these numbers that were in the PowerPoint as far as the revenue that was generated, that's for the countywide a TUT tax, correct? Mm-hmm. How come we weren't provided with numbers for only the unincorporated areas of the county? I know it probably won't be much money. Is that why?
I think we couldn't break those dollars out. The State Board of Equalization doesn't have that ability to provide unincorporated the data for unincorporated versus incorporated.
Okay, because you recently, this county of Santa Clara, they passed an unincorporated tax within their county. I just think that we, the pragmatic side of me says going to the local jurisdictions to our cities and saying, hey, will you rescind your tax? Not going to happen, unfortunately. And so to save us the heartache, I think that we should explore the opportunities in the unincorporated areas, especially when we're talking about general plans, especially when we're talking about study areas and the potential that is there. This is something that could be a good thing for the county in the future. And then the second thing I wanted to address is really kind of this, should we move forward with the tax and you have you know, I've been very hesitant to say I'd be willing to move forward with a tax because there's this trust issue. You know, I think that we have a lot of needs in this county, specifically revenue. We do need revenue, and I understand that, but do I trust our county to do the right thing in allocating additional revenues? I don't know. You know, we all probably could say we don't know because we don't know what this board will look like. We don't know what the administration will look like. And so I think that it's important to establish, I like what was said about the city of, you know, where they made the outreach to the community, you know, because, you know, I would like to see this money allocated, at least a percentage of it, go to a library, you know, go to our current operation or to possible expansion or relocation. Sometime, you know, I would like to see that money allocated towards recreation, you know, the local services where this money is going to have an impact, you know, for our residents, where the residents in our community are specifically going to have a benefit from, you know, if we move forward with this tax, because they're the ones that are voting to approve something to allocate more money to our local government, and we need to repay them with, you know, not only increased level of services and, you know, a tax collector. You know, I'm just using those departments, but, you know, let's get more officers in the streets. I think we need to have a specific plan moving forward, even though we can't say, hey, we're going to use this money for this because it's a general tax, but I think that we need to have a plan to allocate this money responsibly if we do move forward. Next, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Rivas. Supervisor Barros?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what really caught my eye on this presentation, Janelle, is that there are two state constitutional amendments that are moving forward, and they look to be moving forward in a positive direction. I, too, would like to see, I know that a general tax would be more flexible, and we could use it for anything that we wanted. But will we use it for the parks and the library that really are our focus for this general tax? And that's, like somebody mentioned, I think Supervisor Rivas, we don't know what the makeup of the board is going to be in the future. But if we are able to do some sort of a special tax district where we could specifically say we want it for libraries and parks, that would it behoove us to wait and see where the county, where the state amendments are going to go? Joe Paul, have you heard anything on where? I know one of them has already moved through the, I believe, through the Senate on June 18, 2013, and now they're in the Senate Appropriations Committee. So, but we know how those can work. They can be shot down there without much more thought. So I'm just, right now I'm kind of torn. Do we want to wait and see if this happens so that we can be specific on what we present to the community?
We are, the Association of County Auditors, the Ledge Committee, I'm a member of that Ledge Committee, we're watching those bills very closely because, well, it's going to have tremendous implications for all agencies. So, you know, we can come back at a later time to, you know, talk about how, if those bills are brought forward and they're successful, what are the other opportunities in, you know, that are presented as a result of those bills that have to be passed by the voters because they're a constitutional amendment?
Yeah, so it will have to it'll have to be on the ballot first if the Senate approves it, to go before the voters to reduce the threshold, which would be from 2/3, I believe, to 55% of the voters. So that first has to happen before we can go out and seek our own ballot.
I think the you know, there's a lot of unknowns right now of whether they can even get it, you know, have the threshold to have in the Senate, and to get it beyond, you know, beyond the Senate floor. So.
Okay, so we have that kind of hanging over our heads. That could happen. We would then be able to be more specific, right, if that were to go forward. Now, if we decide to go back, which I think we need to do, to go back to the cities to find out where they stand as far as rescinding their taxes, we don't know which way they're going to go. That's going to take some time because they, in turn, they cannot make that decision just like we cannot in intergovernmental. They have to go back to their respective boards councils to put that before a vote. So how much time will we lose in order to stay aggressive in this timeline, Janelle, that you have given us?
You're probably going to lose 2 months, I would say. 'Cause then you're going to have to go out and we would do the RFP for the polling services if we decided to proceed. There's timelines associated with that. So we would probably wait to do the public outreach in January so that we're not doing public outreach in December in the middle of everybody's holiday commotion. So there would be the poll would be possibly in the January months. We'd be close. We're shooting because we would have to begin with the ordinance with your board in May. So you'd have just a few months in there of processing the data to make a decision whether you're going to go forward by May.
Okay. So my recommendation then, Mr. Chair, would be that we try to stay on this timeline. We need to put out the survey. There's no way we're going to know what kind of support we're going to get from the community unless that survey goes out. But we do need to ask the cities their position on this. I don't think that we should make a decision without their input, because you never know. They may be on the same page we're at, and we won't know unless we put it at the intergovernmental level.
Okay. Thank you. Supervisor Munzer.
Supervisor Rivas, did you say that Santa Clara County passed a unincorporated only?
I need to research that because the Board of Equalization was very clear to both myself and your county council office that in no way could we assess a transaction and use tax in just the unincorporated area. They were very clear to that.
Do you know who we could contact up in Santa Clara County and find out about it?
We'll research it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll research that.
I would definitely like that research and see if we can do. And I understand what you're saying fully, but I sure would like to find out about that.
It's possible that Santa Clara received special legislation that allowed them to do that. But as based on our conversations with the Board of Equalization, and we asked this question in writing and got a written response from the Board of Equalization, who administers this TUT. The county has to apply the tax countywide. It cannot apply it just in the unincorporated areas of the county. So we'll follow up on that and see what happened in Santa Clara. They might have gotten special legislation. One other point I was going to make that the board may want to consider at this point that I think is very important. You might want to hear from Joe Paul about the timing of this election, because we've had a lot of internal discussion among staff about the 2014 election versus the 2016 election and the likelihood that the measure would carry at one as opposed to the other. Joe Paul had some real good information about that the board might want to hear. Because if on the timing issue, if this isn't going to go to 2016, that obviously gives the board more room to work. And if it's going to go on 2014, you're on a very short timeline.
Well, I think we've had some discussion on this question before with regard to having a sales tax measure put before the voters on an off-presidential year. Recall that a gubernatorial election is happening next year. In June is the primary, November is the general. Gubernatorial elections are typically the voter turnout is much lower than it is during the presidential election. And we know that for sales tax measures to be successful, most consultants will say you need to have this taken before the voters during a high voter turnout election, and we know that that's during the presidential election year. And specifically in the general election of the presidential election year, not the primary. You know, this last the last presidential election, our voter turnout was much higher than 70%. Prior to that, in 2008, it was over 80%. So these are very, very high numbers, high percentage turnouts. For gubernatorial elections, you're looking at around 50% or less. So the likelihood of passage of a sales tax measure is considerably less, given just looking at voter turnout numbers, not taking into consideration the efforts that would be put into passage of a sales tax measure. So I'm just, letting the board know what about those voter statistics that are important to determining whether you want to go forward with this or not.
From my own perspective, I appreciate the staff report, and reading through there, I gotta admit, I'm one of those people that really don't pay too much attention to sales tax, and there was a reference to that. But it's interesting. I need to ask, is there a study out there or impact on businesses locating or getting established or retention if a community decides to increase sales taxes significantly? And I know probably everywhere around us is probably not too far off that number, but I do have a hard time, feeling that Hollister's rescind their tax on Tacoma and San Juan as well. Hopefully, maybe there's something that comes out of the unincorporated areas. But is there? Have you came across anything like that, Janelle?
I'll research that topic for you.
Yeah, because my gut feeling, and it's just somebody who pays way too much in taxes. I just look at the percentage of what I pay. At what point do we go back to the taxpayer and say that's enough? We've passed Prop 30. We know that there's a number of people that are moving out of this state they're done paying taxes, and they're moving because of that. And I rather, in 1.4 million, no mistake about it, it's a lot of money, and I would love to have that cushion. But really, at the end of the day, it's not that much money, and I rather try to work towards some of the provisions that we have in our general plan, the highway commercial, some of the wine trail overlays with the lodging. I like Supervisor Munzer's idea about reviewing the TOT's tax and making sure we're collecting that. I don't think we collect half of what we should be getting. And also the unsecured taxes. We've had some businesses that have really grown in this county, and I'm pretty optimistic that that they'll continue to grow. Solar Gen, hopefully that's happen very shortly, and that's another $1 million. And working towards that end rather than, try and pick up $1.4 million and taking a tremendous effort. I'm not saying I'm against this, but I'm not saying I would put my name on it either and walk for it. So that's where I'm at.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Rivas.
And to clarify about Santa Clara, what it was a unincorporated sales tax that passed.
So it was a sales tax?
It was a sales tax. Yeah.
We'll research how they did that.
It was in 2012.
2012?
So, yeah.
Okay.
And I got, I believe, 56% of the vote.
Okay. Thank you. Right now, I think it would be interesting to hear from the public on this issue. Is there any public comments?
Marty Richard from Hollister. I would like to support a sales tax in the unincorporated area, and I sent several of you a email on exactly how you could do that legally. It's not incorporated in here because it was not invented within these walls. So therefore, it does not deserve any consideration. I'm sorry I sent you the information. I'm sorry you read it. You could put in countywide tax, and you could offset it by whatever the local tax is. I'm sure that's legal. Maybe we ask the county council. Did you mention that to the folks in Sacramento?
Yeah, we had several discussions with the Board of Equalization about doing something along those lines, and you can, if you can reach a voluntary agreement with the City of Hollister, you can then, in your tax sharing agreement, equalize it so that the amount collected in the City of Hollister is offset. So it requires two things. It requires them to repeal their current tax contingent upon the county tax going into effect, and then number two, reaching an equitable agreement with them.
That would be revenue neutral to the City of Hollister? They wouldn't say, we're not going to get our money for our police department or fire department? That would put a 1% in unincorporated areas, effectively a 1% tax. And that would be fair throughout this county. So you could do it if you wanted to, but obviously you wanted to put something forward that's not going to be approved, because you're never going to get them under these conditions to rescind their tax. And I'm sorry I was disrespectful for laughing at the idea, but I mean, is one of our options that a 747 full of money is going to crash through the ceiling? That's about as much chance as you have of getting Hollister to rescind their tax, and every one of you know it. You are intelligent people. So therefore, I apologize for laughing, but it's funny. So if you were serious about this, you would have put forward a serious proposal. But I take it you're not serious about it. You do not want the tax money. You do not want to even the playing field. You don't care if somebody in Hollister pays $300 extra for a car, and a person living in Ridgemark, who's probably making more money than a person living in Hollister, doesn't. Or you're willing to let the people in Ridgemark pay $300 extra, provided the people in Hollister pay $600 extra. I think it's a shame.
Thank you.
Marvin Jones again there. Appreciate the good presentation, Janelle, there on the numbers that you've had and the numbers you don't have now. And I certainly appreciate the need for additional revenue. It's probably a good a way as any to do it to the entire county, the way that you got there, transaction use tax. I'm on pretty much of a fixed income. I still have a little discretionary money. Y'all keep raising taxes and taking a little bit more of it away, but I could probably handle this okay. But then we commented earlier about your second slide, the Great Recession. There are a lot of people in this county that are hurting, and they don't have the discretionary money to pay another 1% for their gasoline, or 1% for going to the movie if you ever get to go. So I've got mixed emotions about this. You need the money, we need the county services, but the folks that are going to be paying the largest proportion of their discretionary money, if they have any left, are going to be the ones that can least afford it. We kind of talk out of both sides of our mouth at one time or another. We need to help them, but then we're going to tax them a little extra. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing nobody else, we'll bring it back to the board, and I don't know how we want to proceed with this. The staff provided us with 7 areas of determination to help them move this along, and I don't know if we want to deal with that today or move and have a conversation at intergovernmental. Supervisor Munzer?
Ray wants to.
Mr. Chair.
CEO Espinosa.
Yeah, what I would recommend to your board is for us to do a little bit more homework on Santa Clara and County and bring it back to the Intergovernmental Committee, and then we can discuss that with the cities, and then at that point bring it back to the board.
Okay,
That'd be
do we
my-
have a
my-
consensus on the board, Supervisor Barrios?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have to agree with our CAO. I know that even in our packet, it does say that the timing is tight. And if we're going to want additional information, it's going to become even tighter. And so I believe that what we need to do is, besides that, do the research on the questions that this board has, take this thought to intergovernmental, but explore all options, including Marty's. I read Marty's. It makes sense to me, but it's difficult to sit here and explain it. I would like to see our council maybe attend the intergovernmental meeting so he can help us explain it to the city and throw that option out there as well, so that this way we can discuss. So if we can do that, I think that that's the way we should proceed, Mr. Chair, and I will support that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the board? If not, we'll go ahead and direct staff to those effects and bring it back at the soonest possible date for the rest of the board to move on what we're due. Thank you, Janelle, for a very fine report.
Thank you
It
for
was
your
very
input.
good. We'll move on to item 18. Mr. Granger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the next items, 18 through 21, cover the reorganization of the Public Defender's Office. Items number 18 and the following item number 19 regard the amendment of the contract with the Public Defender, Mr. Gregory LaForge, and with the first alternate, Mr. Harry Damkar. In the contract with the Public Defender, there is a special circumstance, special compensation terms that's found in Section B4 of the original contract. That has been amended following negotiations between Mr. LaForge and the ad hoc subcommittee. And the amendment there is to reduce the hourly rate that's being paid to the investigators in those special compensation circumstances. The current rate is $45 an hour. This provision in Section B4 would reduce that rate to $35 an hour and impose a $6,000 cap, which did not exist before, that would only be exceeded through the court's with approval from the court. So this is another cost-saving measure that the ad hoc subcommittee was able to negotiate and bring to the board for its approval, for its consideration and approval. The clerk wanted us to deal with these issues separately, but and we should have separate votes on them. But the board and the public should know that the amendment in Mr. LaForge's contract, which is agenda item number 18, is identical to the amendment in Mr. Damkar's contract, which is agenda item number 19. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granger. Any questions from the board? I'll open up for public comment. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, before I take a motion, I want to thank Mr. LaForge and Mr. Damkar for understanding the issues that the county finds ourselves in, and their participation in something that was truly voluntary, and they work very cooperatively with our staff and the committee, and I have a real appreciation for that. Supervisor Barrios?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, my feelings exactly as yours, and I want to thank them as well, and council and Margie for bringing forward all the comparisons so that we could make an educated decision and move forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's no further discussion. I'll entertain a motion.
Move to approve, Mr. Chair, per staff recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, we'll move on to 19.
So 19, I've already given the analysis on it. I think the only thing you need to do is, unless there's questions from the board, is just open it for public comment and then take a vote.
Okay, any questions from the board? Any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move per staff recommendation.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. And we'll move on to item 21.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So agenda item number 21 is the final step in the reorganization. As the board knows, with the contract being entered into with Mr. Cantu and with the amendments to Mr. LaForge and Mr. Damkar's contract, this addresses compensation issues, cost issues at the public defender level and at the first and second tier conflict level. There are cases that come before the court that require a conflict attorney beyond the first three levels. And in those cases, the San Benito Superior Court has been hiring local attorneys and at times attorneys out from the outside area to represent defendants in criminal cases where those conflicts go beyond the first, second, or third level. To date, these attorneys have not had a contract with the County of San Benito. They've been performing those services without a contract and simply submitting their bills for approval to the court, who then approves them and turns them over to the County of San Benito for payment. In order to tighten cost controls on this group of attorneys, which we refer to as the pool attorneys or the contract pool, the county now, together with cooperation from Judge Sanders as the presiding judge for the County of Superior Court for the County of San Benito, is going to request that any attorney representing the County of San Benito and the fourth level conflict or below sign a contract with the county before they do that. And Judge Sanders has agreed that he will appoint attorneys from the pool who have signed the contract. So I know the ad hoc subcommittee felt that this would also result in a better cost control, reduction in services to date, and it's just prudent fiscal management to make sure that attorneys or anyone, vendors, any vendors, consultants, attorneys, whoever working for the county are doing so under a contract that imposes clear terms and conditions.
Very good. Thank you. Any comments from the board or questions? Supervisor De La Cruz?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt, this pool of agreed attorneys that signed this contract at $65 an hour, right?
Yes.
And then $35 for investigators' fees. If there are a conflict that you can't actually get someone from this pool and you have to go outside, what will be the charge on those?
So there is some flexibility into this because ultimately it's Judge Sanders or the presiding judge that would make sure that any criminal defendant that comes before the court is properly represented. There have been times when, for whatever reason, Judge Sanders has felt the need to appoint an attorney from outside the area. Attorneys from Salinas are the common example. And depending on the case, at times they have received a higher hourly rate. First of all, that's a rare situation that doesn't happen too frequently. Second, if we have enough pool attorneys, I think that would reduce the hiring of other than local counsel dramatically. And third, $65 an hour is what Judge Sanders is currently paying the attorneys. So these contracts do not result in any reduction of the income that currently the court is awarding. Sometimes in the outside attorney cases where they're being retained in murder cases, Judge Sanders has paid a higher rate, $100 an hour, but that's also reflected in this pool contract. So as far as we can tell, in our coming from our discussions with Judge Sanders, these contracts represent the real world. They represent what is actually happening right now in Superior Court. Where these contracts give us more of an advantage and control are like in things of travel costs, because currently the attorneys, there is no guidance, there are no limits in the travel costs. So we've heard stories of extravagant dinners being billed and extravagant stays in the hotels and stuff. Now any attorney who worked for the county, even if they were from outside the county, from Salinas or Gilroy or Santa Clara, would be bound by this county's travel expenses which are set forth in our policies and procedures. So again, it's a good way to maintain fiscal control over people who work for the county.
And I don't, Mr. Chair, I don't remember anyone reading this last night. What's the rate right now that we don't have a policy in place? How much do we,
For travel or fees?
for third level in this case?
Well, Judge Sanders has been paying everybody $65 an hour except in murder cases. And then some murder cases, it goes up to $100.
That's without the policy in place?
That's without the contract in place. So this, again, this contract reflects the reality of what is actually happening.
So all we're doing is just getting those who agreed predetermined dollar amount.
Yeah, and putting them under some control with our travel costs. The investigators' fees are different. Currently, the investigators have been submitting a bill around $45 an hour in special circumstance cases. That will be reduced to $35. So that's some additional cost savings for the counties in admittedly rather narrow exceptions, but every dollar counts.
Yeah, I think it needs to be said that also we have a appreciation for Judge Sanders and his cooperation and understanding that we had to provide a management of these costs, and we did not have that before. It was pretty much free reign, and this is we're able to implement a structure here that I think is going to provide a tremendous savings to on the public defender's services, as well as still maintain a high level of service that the public expects.
Mr. Chair, I got one more question.
Okay.
And I don't even know how to express this, but knowing that we're going into a policy that we already have in place and we made some changes already in the prior motions, I just want to make sure that legal representation is not being compromised.
No, not at all. In fact, we have built into the contracts, again, a safety valve that allows Judge Sanders or whatever judge in the Superior Court there, in their opinion, to award additional amounts or exceed the cap in those situations where it is required or required by law. So this does not impact the effectiveness of representation of defendants in the Superior Court. What it does impact is the cost savings and the amounts being paid out to the county right now without a contract. There is no vendor that I know that does business with the county that isn't required to have a contract. So why aren't attorneys who are providing outside legal services, who are at the end of the day vendors, just like everyone else, not required to sign a contract?
And then my final thoughts, is there any way we could get a report back? I don't know how long we should wait, 6 months?
I was
don't
thinking
know.
6 months. That was exactly my thought.
So there's been a lot of discussion at the ad hoc level, and they may want to address this, but the public defender contracts end June 14th of next year. So in about another 6 months, we probably want to have this discussion again with the board or the committee about where we're going in the future with these contracts, and we'll have some historical data at that time.
Yeah, that was exactly what, after we voted on this, to bring this back to the board January or so, and see where we're standing and how this is all functioning. Any comments from the public? Seeing none, bring it back to the board for an action.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion we direct staff to distribute contracts for indigent defense services to local criminals defense attorneys to provide indigent defense services for third level conflicts and below, and approved letter to be signed by our chair for distribution to the list of local criminals defense attorneys who have previously provided public defense services on behalf of the county.
Okay, I have a motion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, hearing none. We'll move on to the next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, this particular item is item number 22 on our agenda, and this is going to be presented to us by our interim planning director, Byron Turner, and he's going to be discussing with your board a request in providing a information with regards to a request and implementation of a transfer of development credits program within San Benito County, and this is affected in our San Juan Batista rural area. This is Byron Turner.
Yes, thank you. As you know, we have a TDC program, Transfer Development Credit Program, and we have an applicant looking to utilize the TDCs in a project. I have two basic questions for the board today. One is whether the site in question qualifies as open space and agricultural lands of special significance to the community, and therefore that land is eligible for bonus TDCs, meaning that the increased density can be stripped off of that property. And number two, if the board feels comfortable with planning certifying the TDCs for a specific site when no receiving area is established. So we don't know where this density is going to be transferred to. What it's going to be transferred to a bank of some kind. The mechanism is really not that important right now. We will identify, if we, depending on your direction, if we do this, we'll identify the mechanism necessary to do it. It's not in place right now, but we need to know if the bonus density qualifies and if you're comfortable creating this bank without a designated receiving area. So the primary goal of the TDC ordinance was the program's primary goal was to preserve as much of the falling land as possible for various uses of the agricultural industry in the county and for habitat, view corridors, and open space. So and it exists only in the ag productive, rural, and ag rangeland zone. The property in question is zoned appropriately. So when we get to the bonus TDCs, the number of TDCs assigned to each parcel shall be determined. One full TDC for each 5 acres in the AP or R zone. That's what this is zoned. And then 3 additional bonus TDCs for each 5 acres, which has been designated by the Board of Supervisors as open space and agricultural lands of special significance to the community. So only the board can make that determination that this property falls under that. According to our ordinance, a list of approximately 9,000 acres was intended to be identified by the TDC committee and brought to the Board of Supervisors. The TDC committee did not do that. They declined to identify property. We then discussed it with the General Plan Committee, with the GPAC. They too did not identify the land, this 9,000 acres of land. So this has not been established. When we adopted the TDC ordinance, I remember discussing it with the board about dealing with it on a case-by-case basis, but that didn't get codified as part of the ordinance. It still refers to this 9,000, this list, ongoing list. So the property is off on San Juan Canyon Road and Mission Vineyard Road. It's historically been known as the Mayrose Ranch. The home up there is not part of this site, but it is about 420 acres. And there was a minor subdivision approved in July of 2011, splitting it into 4 pieces. This is the property in question. It's rolling hillside. Mission Vineyard Road would be the road to the north, bordering on the north, and then San Juan Canyon Road on the south. This is just a photo that we took from back when we were doing the subdivision, give you an idea of what the site looks like. It's the rolling hills and oak trees. So some of the points regarding the property: that the applicant did not subdivide to the maximum density. It just cut it down into 420 acres into 4 pieces. One of the conditions of approval that was put on the map by the Planning Commission was that design review is required, and you can see that we had them put up story poles to identify potential building sites. So design review is required. Even though this wouldn't qualify for design review under our hillside ordinance, it was the Planning Commission decided that it wanted design review on this subdivision. So the applicant then is contending that because design review is required, therefore this is of open space of special significance to the community, and making that connection. There's minimal farmland. There's no grade 1 soils on the property. Previous attempts to develop large developments on that property have failed in the past. So a little about the receiving areas. Receiving areas are in the urban area of special studies, or urban areas, area of special studies, higher density areas.
Again, no specific areas have been established as receiving areas, and this project does not identify where it intends to apply the transfer of density. So, again, case-by-case basis, does not identify where the density will be transferred. It was anticipated that more TDC-related work would have been done as part of the new general plan. So we did think that after the general plan, more work would be done on the TDC ordinance to then implement the general plan. Obviously, we haven't gotten to that. So there are some options for the board. Reconvening the TDC committee to have them identify that property. We can amend the ordinance with direction regarding this request. You can direct staff to certify the TDCs even without the, and then not linking it with the 9,000 acres. Or, amend the TDC ordinance to apply it to an owner not specific to the land. Back to my original statement, though, what I need to know from the board today, or when you're comfortable, if you need more information, is whether this property is of open space of significance to the community and thereby eligible for the bonus density, for the bonus TDCs, and if you'll authorize the county to create that bank of TDCs that will track, but will not be associated with any specific property. So those are the two items that we need to discuss today. The mechanism, how to do it, we will get to based on your direction.
So I have a question of Byron,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair. Byron, so we could make that decision on deciding on whether this is an open space, if it fits the open space criteria, or we can send it to the TDC committee and let them make that determination. But it sounds like the planning has already made that determination by following that hillside ordinance where they have to, the design study or design review. So are we stuck in the middle here now because of that decision?
Just the planning commission, made required that condition of approval, but that doesn't necessarily identify it as the open space that that's referenced in the TDC ordinance. They did that independently without thinking about without associating with TDCs.
But now the applicant is saying that because they were asked to do that, they fit into the open space.
That is one of the items they're talking about.
Okay,
Yes.
is it too late to change the direction of doing the design review, because they really doesn't fit under we did the design review for Hillside if it's part of the corridors, the scenic corridors.
Yeah, well, let me fill you in with the history, Supervisor Barrios,
Okay.
because the history goes much deeper than in respects to Byron. And maybe the only other person that realizes it might be Margie and maybe Scott. But the area that you can't really appreciate where it's at is the hills above San Juan Bautista. It is Pagan Hill, and it's the Holt House property. The Holt Houses did a subdivision, for probably estate purposes or what have you, I want to say in probably the late 80s. And nobody knows that area better than me. In fact, I spent my summers as a boy tromping through those hills every weekend and every day during deer season, and as a young adult too. So I truly feel that the hillside ordinance was developed for the protection of an example just like that.
So then my question to you would be that the planning commission did make the right decision in requesting the design review then?
Right,
Okay.
yes. They absolutely did.
Even though it doesn't fall under a scenic corridor, it still is worthy of that design because of the location.
Right. And if you've been to the Mayrose house, it's a 22,000 square foot house, like Mr. Turner stated. It has a beautiful view of the San Juan Valley, but it was designed in such a way that you look up there, you don't see it. And that's, when I was on the planning commission, when Mayrose purchased the property, his initial application was for 150 homes, and the city of San Juan just went berserk. You know, and then he resubmitted the application. It took a number of years, and at 75 homes. And of course, it being in my district, being the planning commissioner at that time, I would not support anything more than 10. And we worked out a compromise. The city of San Juan bought into, you know, the concerned citizens that were there at the time, bought into that, and the planning commission still turned down the project. I got outvoted in my own area, in my own district, and I think right now, so Mayrose gave up on the idea, and he sold it to this gentleman from Texas. And he's the one that is kind of moving forward with this subdivision, and he's been very workable as far as making sure that his design fits the community and not have an adverse impact on the view shed. And I really believe that it does qualify, and I'm happy that the Planning Commission did insist on doing the hillside ordinance provisions to make sure those house sites won't have an impact, because you have on the other side of the canyon the Dianza Trail, which is a national treasure.
Right.
And you look right across into that. And so I strongly support this being an area of, you know, of open space qualifying for the TDCs, because it should have never been a 5-acre parcels to begin with. And that's from long before anybody's time on the old general plan. That should have never have happened. And it has an impact on resources, water, sewer, which is the canyon is the source of water supply for the city. And they already have enough problems with their water quality, and a large subdivision is not what they need in that area. And B, I think by banking, you know, being able to bank these TDCs and move them someplace that the services are provided would serve the county well, and also the historical importance of Pagan Hill and the scenic beauty of San Juan Bautista. So I'm strongly in favor of this.
Well, you have a compelling story, and I think then what our decision would be, whether we support identifying this as an open space area, and then this would give them additional bonus TDCs, correct, Byron?
Yeah, it would essentially mean the development potential, they would get bonus development potential at another site.
At another site.
In lieu of developing this site.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, I can't describe, about 2 or 3 times since I've been on this board and on the Planning Commission, that we've had some buyers that when Mayrose was selling that property, and there was some real weird ideas. And we finally have an opportunity to have a project up there on I'll call it Parcel A with Mayrose's house, and I don't know, is it 10 units, Byron? That are building sites that he has?
I think he only identified 4.
4,
at this
even
point.
better. And then I think he acquired a parcel adjacent from the Holt houses.
Yes, both parcels are owned by the same owner.
Right, and more importantly, and this is what's really why this is an issue today, and maybe we need to move on it, is Bonnie Doon has a very innovative vineyard up there, and they want to ultimately put in a wine tasting room, and that is world renowned, not just state renowned, world renowned. And this has been a project that's been there for a couple of years now. Any other questions?
No, let's hear from the public.
Okay, I'll open it up for public comment.
Brad Sullivan?
I'd like to turn back to Byron's page, the second one, for the 2 questions. How do you do that? It's always nice to be out there and have your argument or what you want to say basically said better by the chair. And I represent Irwin in this matter, and he came in shortly after the Planning Commission saying, hey, the story polling was not properly approved. And we had discussions with Byron and his predecessor as the chair about whether we should appeal that to you. The thought being that, and I was in agreement with Gary and Byron at that time, that the thought being that you can't find open space in this county or even agriculture that has any more significance than this site because of the cross, because of the Sacred Ridge, Pagan Hill, and that you're preserving it, and you're preserving it with an ag use with the Bonnie Doon Winery. And there will be a couple of other houses hidden, so that we worked through these calculations, and then it went in limbo. And it went in limbo because the TDC plan was created at a time where you guys did not define specific sending and receiving areas because you had a general plan update process that had been started, and the time to do so could be then, or it will be when someone tries to use these TDCs in increasing the density of either a subdivision or parcel map. I guess it wouldn't be a parcel map, but a small or a large subdivision, that would be the time for the CEQA review and seeing if that area is appropriate to be a receiving area. And so what Mr. Sewell, myself, and the planning department suggested was that you designate these areas as special significance to the community, which I think the chair very passionately argued, and it's just a nice place to see to me, but it's someone who lived there, it's very significant. And then that you come up with some manner of documenting that these TDCs are available. And that is something that the code is somewhat silent to. My suggestion would be that they simply be recorded on the final map as he's entitled to X number of TDCs. And whether you call it a bank, you call it a log, or you call it a list, somewhere at the Planning Commission there be some record of Irwin Sewell or Sagrado has, I'll wrap up, has X number of TDCs. I think members of the TDC committee who were around at that time, they didn't get into the details of how those would be maintained. They're maintained in all types of different ways, and that, I believe, is something that will be addressed by you in the implementation of the general plan after it is adopted. And that today, answer the first question, yes, and in the second one, give direction to the planning department to maintain these somehow, and I would suggest also putting on the...
Supervisor Munzer has a question for you.
I don't think, after our chair discussion on the first item, I don't think I'll even go there. But I'm struggling with the second one. I'm struggling with giving TDC credits where there's no receiving area. And what I'm struggling with is how do we keep track of that, and then if it comes back and somebody wants to use those credits in an area that maybe we don't want them used in, do you have a feel for how all that can play out?
Well, how it's played out in other cities and counties who've used receiving areas in TDCs, San Francisco for one. They have the TDCs they took off of Mount San Bruno because it's an overflight, it's where you take off. And those could be applied in the downtown area to increase the height of your building. So if a person wants to use them, then they come to you and asks if they can use them. You decide whether they can use all 20 stories, or no, we got to draw the line here at 10 because it, you know, is otherwise too much density for that particular block. So in that case, you know, you analyze them when they go to be applied in the receiving area, and that's kind of what the one paragraph in your code was allowing. That until you had the details, that you didn't want to, you know, basically have the whole program sitting in hibernation for a number of years.
Supervisor Barrios?
Yeah, have you seen these done by resolution, where the resolution records and becomes a public document of the TDCs, or is it just administratively?
Most of the ones that are done have a more refined ordinance structure, which in your case I think you would have wanted to do, but for the general plan advisory committee just getting started, you know, in that process. That I went to most of them. I don't want to say all because I must have missed a few, but the original thing, this was when Rob Mendiola was the planning director, had a ordinance structure that was modeled on the city of Pasadena, and it had a very specific way that they were banked, how they were created, how a log was kept, and then there was also a recording at the county recorder. So that was very detailed. I think in this case, the recording could be done as a note on the map, and then the log kept at the county. And then if you decide to set up a banking system, which was mentioned in the staff report about a committee growing up to maintain an open space district or something, Santa Clara County has that. They have a special committee that buys them themselves from people and retires them, and you know, and they basically finance this trade in TDCs and open space. Maybe that's what you want to do, but I think right now you give staff direction. It can be recorded, and it could be done by resolution, and Mr. Turner is not forced to put out another fire while he's trying to, you know, move the general plan along.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan.
I have another speaker, Scott Fuller.
Scott Fuller from San Juan Oaks. Mr. Chair, board members, thank you. I'm not here to comment on this proposal specifically at all. I don't have an opinion or any business to do with that. But San Juan Oaks has been very supportive of the TDC program and involved in it, has a lot of history with it, and we plan as part of our project to transfer density from a parcel we own in the San Juan Valley to San Juan Oaks. But so a couple things I wanted to mention, though, that relate to this. One, I think the TDC committee always contemplated having a bank. They, you know, it's complex how to work out the bank, but they always contemplated having one for these kind of situations, because you may not always have a receiving area in mind, but you may have someone willing to preserve their land and use it as a sending area. So banks were always contemplated, so I think that's appropriate, and the details, you know, would have to be worked out. On the issue of the 9,000 acres, you know, I don't think, well, on the issue of sending and receiving areas, it wasn't only that the general plan was going to get going in the general plan committee. I think there was a reluctance from the planning commission level, the board level, and ultimately the GPAC level to designate sending and receiving areas, because that is a very difficult political task.
It is.
You may be seen as creating winners and losers when you do that, particularly from the sending areas. So I think politically it's a very difficult task, and no one has wanted to take it on, and I don't think it's necessary to take it on. I think you can do it on a case-by-case basis as they come before you. As far as the 9,000 acres being designated, I don't think that was such a big political issue. It just hadn't been gotten to yet. I will remind you that in your PERGI ordinance and in your 1% growth management ordinance, when you revise those before eliminating them, and I'm not arguing for bringing them back at all, but let me say that In both those ordinances, you added language for bonus density. You added criteria for bonus density, primarily for prime farmland. So I was surprised that language was not in the TDC ordinance. I thought it was. And I would just like to say, if you do open up the TDC ordinance to look at some of these things, you ought to at least consider putting in the bonus density. Even if you don't do the 9,000 acres, you live it case by case, you ought to at least put in the bonus density for the prime farmland, because that was sort of obvious as to what you want to preserve first. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marty Richmond again from Hollister. My comments are similar to Mr. Fuller's. They're not about this specific thing, but it appears to me from the logic of it that it says special significance to the community. From the logic of it, any land that's in a special program, such as the Hillside Ordinance or any special program, would be Valley View or Shed Views or whatever, seems logical that becomes special significance by definition. And I think if you do open up the ordinance to redo it, you should define it so. It should give you the option of also saying, yeah, here's a piece that's specially significant, but I think automatically someone who has to go through the hoops of whatever special program they're in because of the location, like the Hillside Ordinance or a View Shed Ordinance, automatically becomes special to the community. If it wasn't, it would not be in one of those, quote, special programs. So it's just a logical connection that you can make if you reopen the ordinance and just get it defined so the next group that comes through won't have to say, well, I'm in the hillside, but I'm not on agricultural land. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ray Pierce, San Benito County. I was on TDC from the beginning, and one of the great fears was the sending and receiving areas, because you could make or break different sections of property at the time. So you gotta take the time machine back. The general plan actually was not even started when we were working. So some of the elements, like the specific areas that are on the general plan now, probably came from village areas that we were discussing at the time as possible receiving areas and things like that, hidden little areas and stuff like that. So I guess I would have to agree with Brad and Scott too, was in on some of them. Banking was sort of always something we had sort of considered that would be the way to go. The only thing is that because we didn't actually have the county sitting heavily in on the conversations at the time on how to administer that, it was never really approached directly. And also we were an advisory team, so that wasn't really, we didn't really see that as our job to define that. But we thought that the general plan would probably help to solve a lot of those problems. But in concept, yeah. So, and I mean, significant areas, I mean, we spoke to that. It was, actually, we were talking about putting certain elevation level in the hills and saying, okay, anything above this elevation would probably be significant. So this probably goes into play with most of that.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? If not, I'll close the comment period and bring it back to the board for direction. And any members feel that this is not an area of special significance? That's good.
Wow. We did not make eye contact.
You were joking, right, Anthony?
Yeah, I was, absolutely. When you get close to lunch, you have to maintain a sense of humor. So I think the board's direction would be to establish that that area would be an area of special significance. And then the second question feels if the board feels comfortable with the planning certifying the TDCs for the specific site when no receiving area has been established. We heard from a couple of speakers as far as what is your idea about the banking of those TDCs and how it should be done, Byron?
Well, it's always been something, I understand that it's always been something that was contemplated, but we were going to work on the mechanism later. What we'll do, once we get your direction today, is work with County Counsel's office to identify if any amendments that need to happen in the ordinance, but at the same time, I can still communicate to the applicant what direction you're heading, and then he can go ahead and move forward with his plans as well, while we are making any amendments that we need to do.
Okay, that seems reasonable enough, and so we'll let you work on that. Anyhow, any other comments or questions from the board?
Yep.
Thank you very much for a presentation. We'll take a lunch break now, and then we'll come back for a closed session
No, we have two
at
more
1
items.
o'clock.
1:15.
Well, we have it set at 1. So we'll be back for a closed session at 1 o'clock.
We still have two items.
Okay, good. Yeah, I always do this. I get it.